Hey everyone, RT here from Vortic Watch Company. Today we're talking about Packard Motor Company and Hamilton and the really awesome retirement gift pocket watches that those two companies made for Packard employees. Before we dive in, just a real quick disclaimer that Vortic Watch Company specializes in taking antique American pocket watches, turning them into wristwatches, preserving American history one watch at a time. We're talking about the history of these brands and other car company brands, and the brands are and have been on these pocket watch dials for nearly 100 years. Vortic is in no way associated with Hamilton, Ford, Packard, Elgin, etc., etc. Now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into the history of Packard Motor Company because it is fascinating. Two brothers, James and William Packard, started the Packard Motor Car Company back in 1899. They produced the first car. Super cool. They made it in Warren, Ohio. And obviously, right around the turn of the century, there was a lot of people trying to figure out how to make cars. A lot of famous names back then making cars. But we dove into Packard specifically because we've found maybe a dozen of these Packard dial pocket watches. And they're just really, really interesting, especially the tagline is just fascinating to me. So Packard Motor Company moved to Detroit in 1903. They built a 3.5 million square foot warehouse by 1906. And the cars they were making in that era, like the 1906 era, at that time were $2,600 a piece. Now, we did the math with inflation, and that is $90,000 approximately in today's value. So Packard Motor Car Company was competing with Mercedes and Rolls-Royce back then. These were really high-end, really nice cars. And that's why their tagline was so bold. A lot of these pocket watch on the dial, it doesn't actually say Packard. Some of them say Hamilton, like it has the insignia of Packard. It has their tagline, and then it says Hamilton. But almost none of them say Packard on the dial. Some of them say Packard on the back of the watch, and the engraving and stuff like that. But almost everyone we found has this insignia and this little logo on it that says, "Ask the man who owns one." And it's just cool. There are a few different variations of the insignia or the logo. They always say, "Ask the man who owns one." This one also underneath that, it says "of a distinguished family," which is really interesting. Not all of them say that. There's a few different styles, a few different fonts that we found. Most of these that we found that say "Ask the man who owns one" on the dial, they were made by Hamilton. This particular one that we've just found is a South Bend movement and fits the South Bend movement perfectly. So it looks like this was made by South Bend, which is interesting. One just interesting fact tying all that together, kind of skipping to the end of the story about Packard Motor Company, is that they were merged with Studebaker Car Company in, 1956, I think. And at that point, and throughout that time, if you didn't know, the South Bend Watch Company is directly correlated and connected to the Studebaker Car Company. The Studebaker family made the South Bend pocket watches. So it's all kind of intertwined, which is fascinating. It was all kind of in that, Detroit area, which makes a lot of sense being a car manufacturer. So other just fun facts that we found about Packard Motor Company was that in World War II, or during World War II, Packard Motors made over 50,000 engines for the war effort, most famously making the engines for the P-51 Mustang. So they didn't just make cars, and they didn't just make great engines. They made some of the best engines in the world for the biggest and most powerful military in the world at that point during World War II. And like I said, 1956, story of Packard kind of comes to an end, merging with the Studebaker car company. But doesn't come to an end for us here at Vortic, because we're talking about these pocket watches that we found that we're turning into wristwatches. James Ward Packard, one of the brothers, one of the founders of Packard Motor Company, was a predominant pocket watch and wristwatch collector. So if you Google search James Ward Packard watch collection, he, as a collector of all nice watches, commissioned some of the rarest, most complicated, and very valuable pocket watches specifically to ever be made and imported into America. Most of them that I saw were Pateks. And these are, repeaters and all kinds of really highly complicated, one-of-a-kind pocket watches made just for this gentleman in Switzerland back then and shipped over. So he clearly had a thing for watches and pocket watches at that point. And he must have had the idea that when you worked for Packard Motor Car Company for 10 plus years, you would get a nice gift from the company. And we have a couple here that have their original cases. It's rare that we have this. This one I'll show you it's the same dial. Obviously, Hamilton had this contract, it seemed like, and Hamilton partnered with Packard and said, hey, when you need corporate gifts, when you need retirement gifts, we'll make these for you. Maybe when you got the gift, you could choose a different style. We've seen 10 years of service, 20 years of service. I read about a 15 years of service. This one that we have the case on, it says, presented to Frank L. Sherman by the Packard Motor Car Company in appreciation of 10 years loyal service, 1936. And this is a 21 jewel Hamilton 904 movement. That is the original gold case. This appears to be solid gold. Really cool to see. And because, unfortunately, a lot of those are solid gold or silver cases, this is how we get most of them. Just the dial and the movement. We don't get the case because, like I said, it's kind of our business model is finding these pieces of American history that have unfortunately been scrapped by pawn shops or gold and silver dealers, and we just get the inside and we preserve that piece of history now as a wristwatch. So this is an example of what it looks like when we complete our work and make that Packard Hamilton pocket watch into a one-of-a-kind Vortic wristwatch. So we have a few other, pieces of automobile history here on the table. I wanted to make a video just about Packard and everything we've learned about them. Just a few other notables. Hamilton was around from 1892 to 1969, very similar time period to Packard. So it makes sense. Hamilton was one of the great American watch companies. They made some of the highest end pocket watches. And I'm hoping and assuming that a lot of these are in personal collections somewhere. If your grandfather worked for Packard Motor Company and has one of these that's signed with his name on it and 10 years of service, hopefully that is a very valuable heirloom that you would either keep or send to us to preserve for you as a Vortic watch. We are going to the Barrett-Jackson car auction, January 20th through 28th. And because we have a booth there at one of America's largest, car auctions and car shows, I figured, well, let's see what we can find that's in the automobile industry. Let's see if we can find any Ford pocket watches or Chevy pocket watches and things like that. And then, we dove deeper into the history of Studebaker and Packard and some of these other companies. And Packard seems to be the one that has the most available, the one that we could find the most of. I have 5 here on the tray. I don't know how many we'll be able to find, but we will have all of these available for either custom build into a one-of-a-kind custom watch or a few of them to be available across that week, the last week of January that we're in Barrett-Jackson as part of our Watch of the Day watches. So that's why we're making the video. That's why we'll be talking about this really cool logo, and tagline, ask the man who owns one. Packard, we can show off all the cool, advertisements and vintage advertisements we found from Packard Motor Company. And it's, like I said, it's not just Packard, it's Studebaker, it's Ford, it's Chevy. There's some really cool stories that we're about to tell. So thanks for watching this video. Thanks for learning more about the collaboration for retirement gifts between Packard Motor Car Company and the Hamilton Watch Company. I'm RT at Vortic, and make sure you come and check us out at the Barrett-Jackson Auto Auction January 20th through 28th in Scottsdale, Arizona. To learn more about this and all the other things that we do, head to vorticwatches.com and make sure you sign up for our newsletter at vorticwatches.com/newsletter so you don't miss out.